Good evening, everyone. My name is Francisco, and I'm a recent grad of the class of 2012 as well. My childhood was rather normal. I came from a divorced household, but for the most part, I grew up with my mother in a loving environment. When I was 5 and 6, I had a couple of big events that were largely unconscious and didn't really understand the impact they would later have on my life. I come from an entrepreneurial family, and so when I was 13 years old, I was handed my first business book, and it was entitled How to Win Customers and Keep Them for Life. And this book got me started on my quest of knowledge and gathering as much information I could, specifically over the next decade around business and self-development. So you can imagine, as a young, passionate kid, dovetailed with that, I excelled at everything I did. I did really well in grade school and junior high and high school and won the awards and the valedictorians and the letters in golf. I went on to, letters in golf, right? That's great. But I ended up going to a great university, excelled academically, ended up marrying my college sweetheart a couple years out of college. By the time I was 23, I was a young entrepreneur. By the time I was 25, I was a young CEO of my own organization of 80 to 100 employees, doing several $1 million of annual revenue. And a couple years later, when I was 27, I had my first son. In 29, my second. So I had this really nice ride on this goal line and had a nice trajectory, and then life throws me my first curveball and challenge. I'm diagnosed with stage 3 testicular cancer, and it had spread to my lymph nodes and all over my lungs. And so I spent the first part of my 29th time around the sun battling cancer. And I lost my hair and went through the whole chemo treatment, and by the grace of God, I made it through. A year later, the economy takes a nosedive, and I had to shut down the doors of my organization that was near and dear to me, and simultaneously file a multi-million-dollar bankruptcy. A year later, transitioned in a 10-year relationship of my wife at the time of 7 years, and a relationship that came to an abrupt end that I did not want to end at that time. So you can imagine I was in a very dark place, very challenging. Through a course of a couple of coincidences, I found USM. I came to an informational evening like this and listened to the grad panel, and I was enamored. I said, I gotta go. This sounds amazing. And I did. And coming from those 3 big events, I obviously had a lot of material to work with. What was front and center for me, though, was that I had failed, that I was a failure, that I had not done enough, that I had not earned to be able to live that life. And what I realized is, going through the program, is that these events that happened when I was 5 and 6 years old really contained the seeds and the roots of these misbeliefs and misidentification and limiting interpretations. And where they were really showing up for me was in the relationship with my father, who I loved and cared for and admired very much because he was a very successful entrepreneur. And in that dark period, I was very vulnerable and had to come to him a couple different times for financial support. And, I remember listening to him, and he tells me, well, how much are you making? And what are your expenses? And how do you plan to pay this back? And how much are you saving? And all I could hear was that he was judging me, that I had failed. How could I find myself in this position, after having all this success? And it wasn't until, that second year in the relationship project where I went through and I, as Marian mentioned, worked with the compassionate self-forgiveness, and I was able to forgive myself for buying into those misconceptions and those judgments. And until I went through and I cleaned all that up, then all of a sudden, the shift in the relationship with my father changed. Because what I realized is that he was just being a loving and kind father and sharing his wisdom with me. And what was really going on was inside, I was holding myself as a failure. And as a result, my outward experience from him was that, he was reflecting that back to me. And so once I shifted that, and all of a sudden, the relationship shifted dramatically. And all of a sudden, the level and the depth of the relationship changed. It went up a lot, even in comparison to before. I'm able to look at him in the eye and tell him that I love him. And he's able to do that back to me. And that's something that we were not able to do before USM. And, there's been just so many shifts in all different areas of my life. So many. And USM has been the catalyst for all of it. Big shift that occurred for me, It's my sense that as we evolve in consciousness, one of the things that we want to do is sort of the natural inclination of the soul, I believe, that we want to begin to give back. We want to be in service. We want to contribute. And so what was really in that second year project for me, being that I had been such a student of business, that I wanted to create a business model that gives back. And that for me had so much juice. And so being that I'd been in the mortgage industry for 13 years, I decided that I wanted to bring forward a soul-centered mortgage model. And so what I started to do, since I catered to first-time home buyers, was to deliver a mortgage experience that's really centered around making sure we structure people's finances correctly. So as they go into home ownership for the first time, they're going to have a much better chance of success and ultimately get them on a path to prosperity. So we're doing that from the client perspective, but where the juice is for me is that for every time someone buys a home, we're helping to build a home for someone in need. And we're doing it in that client's name. Now these homes run around $1,500, and since I completed the project, we've built about 15 of these so far. But what's interesting is that everyone around us is starting to see this, and the real estate agents who refer us to clients now are also wanting to contribute. And so it's our hope that within the next 3 to 6 months, we will actually be able to build one home for someone who is buying a home here. And we're also planting 25 trees on their behalf to offset the carbon footprint of the mortgage transaction. And so, it's just a beautiful situation. And, from a guy who 3 years prior didn't have a penny to my name, no confidence, down in the depths of the ocean floor, as I would call it, to be standing in front of you now and to be in my heart and to be able to share from there. Well, that's just magic. That is a miracle. So thank you very much for your time.